Hello, Carol and Stephen.
No video, please.
Hi, Dee.
Hi, everybody, but I'm going to turn off video because that's the point. We just want the panel. I'm surprised those are coming on.
Hello,
no
Barbara.
Video, folks. Hi, Barbara. Hi, everybody. I don't mean to be rude, but we're turning off video.
Hey, Judy. Ah, the Redlows. Hi, Karen.
He knows them all.
I know everybody. I recognize
everybody. So whatever I did with not having video didn't work.
That's all right.
It's okay, but anyway, the panelists are at the top. In fact, if I make you each co-hosts, which is what I'm going to do, you will just remain at the top at all times, which is good. Give me 1 minute to get the logistics set up here. All right, I think you're all co-hosts now.
Okay.
We just have a few more people joining us from the waiting room. All right. We have 484 people with us now, and people are still joining us. So I think this is just terrific. We are delighted to have you all here. My name is Stephanie Owitz. I'm the director of the Levis JCC Sandler Center. As many of you know, we've been closed for several months due to the pandemic, but we've managed to stay closely in touch with all of you and connecting through the internet and Zoom. The internet has really been our friend the last few months. I can't imagine where we would have been without it. As much as we complain about it sometimes, we sure did need it now. It's enabled us really to stay in touch, so thank you for that. I'm going to put my email address in the chat in a minute. If anyone has any questions or would like a recording of this, you can send me an email and I will share the recording with you. And also, if you'd like to be on a list for our other virtual programs, please do send me an email and I'll add you to the list. Most of you probably already are on my list. So it's really my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Robert Watson, who really doesn't need much introduction to you. He knows you all on a first name basis. I heard him greeting you as you were arriving, but I will introduce Dr. Watson, who is one of our favorite speakers at the Levis JCC. As Robert mentioned, I've known him for about 12 years, and 2 or 3 times a year he speaks at the JCC, and we get a full audience every single time. He's a historian and a political activist and a friend to our community and a real asset to our community. So Robert, please introduce your panel, and thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I wish we could do this in person. This movement's not going away, and tragically, I think hate and oppression are not going away either, so we could possibly schedule this on the other side of COVID and do it in person. I'm quite honored to be able to moderate this panel, and we have 3 wonderful panelists with us, and I thank Stephanie. I always enjoy working with Stephanie. She does a remarkable job. So in terms of the format, I have a brief opening comment to try to set the tone. I want to very briefly explain the origins of the Black Lives Matter movement. Then I'm going to introduce our 3 wonderful guests. The 3 guests and I are going to have a nice, vigorous conversation and open, honest dialogue. Then after that, we'll take questions from the audience, and I have a brief closing remark, and then we'll wrap this up. I've also put together a series of resources put out by the NAACP, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League, and others that I'm emailing Stephanie so she can put them up on the website if you would like to continue the conversation. So with that, getting started, this conversation may make a few folks feel uncomfortable. That's natural. This topic is far too important to let any discomfort limit us. So that's completely natural. The goals of our event today are to facilitate an honest, civil, and productive conversation on race, racism, and the Black Lives Matter movement, one that will allow us to take positive steps in opposing the hate and ending the violence. We all of us right now have a front row seat to history in the making, which affords us the important vantage point of being a part of impactful events in real time. But this also behooves us to act, to not be bystanders in the face of injustice and hate and violence. Of course, violence against unarmed Black men is, tragically, not new in our nation. It predates the founding. It was an inseparable part of the settling and conquest of the Americas 400 years ago. And through slavery, it has been bled into the very soil of America. It is an inescapable part of who we are, our national narrative, our stories, all of us, even if it was not always a part of our curriculum, textbooks, and dinner conversations. If you'll indulge in a story and for just a few seconds, we cannot discuss the killing of George Floyd, for instance, in isolation. It was not simply a case of a bad apple or two bad apples killing someone. It was not a case of a bad police officer mishandling an unarmed suspect. No, to see it as such is to deny history and not get at the root causes of the crisis. It was not an exception to the rule. It was merely the latest in a difficult reality. Indeed, the George Floyd case can only be understood within the context of centuries of systemic, ever-present racism, hatred, and oppression. The killing of George Floyd, to my mind, stems directly from slavery, from years of Jim Crow, from Blacks being denied basic rights, denied the right to vote, denied access to the same schools as whites, denied the white suburbs, denied justice. A Black man born in the year 2001, same age as my freshmen and sophomores on campus, has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison in his life. With race, the past is always present. That's part of the challenge, but it's also part of our collective roadmap for how we get to the bottom of this. Real quickly, the Black Lives Matter movement. It dates to February of 2012, when a white man named George Zimmerman shot and killed an unarmed Black teenager, Trayvon Martin. We all remember this. Why did he kill him? For doing nothing, for being Black in a white neighborhood. It was just the latest. And it happened right here in Florida, in Sanford, Florida. After a jury acquitted Zimmerman in July of 2013, people had had enough. That's when 3 women, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza, started the Black Lives Matter movement. Then there were 2 high-profile killings of unarmed Black men in 2014 that dominated the news. You remember this, Eric Garner in Staten Island, and of course, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. While this built support for the movement, modeled after, in some ways, the civil rights movement, discourages violence. The 3 founders wrote that their creed is loving engagement. From a hashtag, it's grown into an international movement with thousands of demonstrations in every major city and as we speak. Tragically, though, the list continues to grow. John Crawford, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, you remember the names, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, recently Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. Well, they're more than just names or statistics. This has become one of the largest social movements in American history. And with that, let me introduce our distinguished guests. You all probably know our first guest, Senator Lori Berman, our state senator. She graduated magna cum laude from Tufts, impressive, earned her law degree from George Washington, and an LLM from University of Miami. She served in the Florida House from 2010 to 2018 when she was elected to the Florida Senate. She's currently the vice chair of the Senate Health Policy Committee and the Senate Democratic Whip. We all also know her to be a tireless advocate for expanding quality and affordable health care, fighting for environmental protection in public schools, and for being such a strong voice for securing equitable rights for women and for all people. Senator Lori Berman, thank you.
Thank you.
Our second guest, also a longtime friend of mine, Dr. Deandre Poole. Dr. Poole is a senior instructor in the School of Communication and Multimedia Studies at FAU. Was associate member of the graduate faculty, has over a decade of experience in curriculum and instruction. His PhD in communication and culture is from Howard University. Deandre is active in critical race theory, community and civic engagement, and political discourse. One of the many things I admire about Deandre is it's hard to find an organization in the area that he's not leading. He's been president of the United Faculty of Florida for the FAU chapter, chair of the Criminal Justice Advisory Board for the City of West Palm Beach, vice chair of the Palm Beach County Democratic Party, chair of the Coalition for Black Student Achievement, chair of the Academic Advisory Board for the School District of Palm Beach County, and I'm running out of time. Dr. Deandre Poole, thank you. Our third guest, you're going to be reading about this guy in 5 years is my prediction. Jadon Johnson. Jadon is a Jamaican-born social entrepreneur. He's a student at Lynn University, majoring in social entrepreneurship, and he was selected as one of the few prestigious Watson Institute scholars. And with a name like Watson Institute, it's got to be good. We won't hold that against him. Despite his age, Jadon is already a proven leader and has accomplished remarkable things. Jadon is active in movements to protect endangered species in his home country. Get this, he's been helping to lead a movement to mobilize and produce and distribute over 15 million medical supplies to people in need during the COVID crisis. Wow. He's been fighting for vulnerable and at-risk communities his whole life, and now he's active in the Black Lives Matter movement. Jadon pushes the boundaries of technology, advocacy, and social impact, and I'm honored to have the three of you with us. So let's get to the questions. And we'll start with Senator Berman and go to all three of you. So what does the Black Lives Matter movement mean to you?
That's a great question, and thank you for putting this panel together. I'm really happy to be here with all of you this evening. I looked at the history of the movement also, and I remember Trayvon Martin. Unfortunately, I was in the legislature when that happened, and I remember the movement starting at that time. And to me, it's a really unbelievable large movement. It continues to grow, and what it represents to me is anti-racism, which I think is great, and that's where we as a society need to move. We need to become an anti-racist society, and that movement is pushing us in the direction. I went on their website today just to kind of see what they said, and they said they stand up against white racism and for supporting Blacks against vigilantism, and the state supported violence also. So I guess those are the exact what they consider themselves, but to me it's so much larger than that. It's truly a social justice movement to get America to the next phase where we need to be an anti-racist society.
Thank you, Senator Berman. Overdue and an impressive movement. Dr. Poole.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. I would also echo those sentiments of Senator Berman. I'll just add that for me as a Black man, this movement is about the economic injustice, institutional racism issues that are pervasive at every level of our society. And as a nation, we like to say how patriotic we are, how wonderful we are, that we have this great country. And no doubt, America is a great country, but America also has sins that we have not dealt with. And we have swept race under the rug for so many years. That is unfortunate that has taken the death, a movement of George Floyd, his death to really highlight this Black Lives Matter movement. And as you pointed out, started with Trayvon Martin. And here we are, and these killings and these murders continue to happen. And so this movement, again, is symbolic of where we are as a nation and where we need to be as we move forward. We're not where we need to be, and sadly, we shouldn't need a Black Lives Matter movement. We should not, but that's where we are. That's where we are.
Thank you, Dr. Poole. I've been encouraged by the dialogue. I can't remember in my lifetime, and I'm 58, ever seeing people want to engage in a type of honest and difficult and open dialogue. And by God, that's one of the first steps in the process. Thank you. Jadon, Coming from Jamaica, you probably have, you and I talked off camera, we talked about coming from a black country to a white culture and your unique perspective on the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, no, I think that's the very interesting thing. You know, I grew up in a predominantly black society. I'd never meet somebody and first identify that individual by the color of their skin.
Yeah.
I always joke around to say that the first time in my life I felt black was coming to the United States at 6 years old. And it was just the stairs that was the very different thing for me, or walking into a store and having somebody remind me that I have to pay for something, which is just an experience I've never had before in my life. But for me, the Black Lives Matter movement represents a black solidarity, because even though I am a Caribbean black person and I identify as Jamaican, I do understand the injustices that, you know, the African American community is experiencing, because my country just gained independence in 1962. My parents were alive while my country was still considered, you know, under British colony. So I am well in tune with the fact that it is the duty of Black individuals across the world to not just isolate themselves, but to join a global conversation on what does equality, equity mean for us, you know, so that we can enjoy the beauty of our skins regardless of where we are in the society.
Thank you, Jadon. Building on that, and to Dr. Poole, we've established that, you know, the Trayvon Martin case was in 2012, and 8 years later and countless deaths later, why is it that the George Floyd killing seemed at this moment, that particular killing, why was this one a game changer? Why did this seem to ignite a worldwide movement as opposed to other ones? Any thoughts on why the George Floyd case is unique?
Certainly, there are a couple of things, but the one thing that makes this case unique is you actually have a black man, a grown black man on camera laying on the street with his face pushed into the concrete, who was crying out for his deceased mother. And for the millions of people across the country, the millions of people across the globe to see there is something special about a mother. And for moms to see that, to see this man screaming, crying out for his mom, that was something that just touched the heart and the minds of so many people. And that in itself, that scene, that traumatic event is what I believe was the catalyst. Now, some have said, well, you know, you created a martyr, you know, that George Floyd is a martyr for this massive global movement. But others have said, and I agree with those who said he's not a martyr, but he's a catalyst. He's a catalyst for the kind of change, the kind of movement that we're starting to see that has brought so many men and women, young people, black, white, together around this central issue. So I would say he's the catalyst of change, but just the very idea that this is right on camera. He's crying out, "I can't breathe," for 8 minutes. That was the moment that I think that really changed the perspective for a lot of people.
Great point. It came into every living room in the country in a gritty, unfiltered, and highly disturbing way. And it's sad that it took that to raise that level of consciousness. Jadon, anything you'd like to add to that? Why the George Floyd case at this moment seemed to be such a game changer?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Watson. And I mean, I do completely agree with Dr. Poole. But the one thing I'd like to throw in there is that, you know, typically when we see these like traumatic events on the news, we're given this opportunity to leave and we go to work the next day, and we put our serious faces on and we just do work to forget what has happened. And that trauma almost gets pushed to the side in the name of professionalism. But due to COVID, we are stuck at home. And we went to bed with it, we woke up with it, we had to do our work with it, and it was just stuck with us for the day. And I really felt, as personally, it pulled at me in just a way that was, I couldn't sleep for a whole week after watching that video. And immediately, the one thing that came to me is that something needs to be done. And that was my personal call to action from just witnessing that video. And I feel like that was a similar call to action for many people across, because we couldn't hide from the reality of our situation anymore. We were stuck at home and we had to live with it and we had to process it. And we didn't have our friends around to help us laugh at it. We just had to deal with it, and it really pushed us.
Thank you, Jadon. Senator?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything said by Dr. Poole and Shadon. Certainly having COVID, being home, certainly seeing it in real time happening, people watching it, now every cell phone is a media camera for people to watch. And then I think the other thing that has changed what made it so impactful is social media. In the early, even when Trayvon Martin happened, social media was not as ubiquitous as it is right now. And people are putting it out all over social media. And that's really, I think it's great because all those factors converge to make this so important and such a catalyst for moving on the Black Lives Matter movement.
All good points. Within 24 hours of that killing, when I went on to try to read more about it and find out about the police department, George Floyd, what had been happening in Minneapolis, you click on and there are countless, millions of posts on social media, and everybody's weighing in. It's become something that, in terms of, we'll talk later about police oversight and accountability, but you can no longer sweep this kind of a thing under the rug with social media, especially when there were people standing there filming and you could feel their pain as they were approaching that. Let me start with Jadon with this one. What do you say to someone who says, well, all lives matter? Does that cheapen the movement? And are they completely missing the point when they say all lives matter?
Yeah, it's almost as if I have a broken arm and I go to my physician, and the physician looks at me and goes, well, all bones matter. I completely agree, but at this current time, I'm having massive pain in my arm, and I think it's the same thing that we as Black people are advocating for. The systematic and systemic racism, injustice, prejudice is the pain in our arm, and it's hurting more now more than ever. And I can never understand people who have this need to add butts to the argument. There's absolutely nothing wrong with saying Black Lives Matter, and we can take this approach and saying, and why? It gives us this perfect space to have a conversation, but we've become so polarized as a society that it is easier to say, well, all lives matter too, and all lives need to matter because of this. And even as somebody kind of mentioned here in the chat, is this concept of making America great again. Is America so great if it has never been great for all the people who should enjoy the liberty of the amendments and the Constitution that was put in place to protect said citizens? It's just a really important thing for us to stop and reflect on our own position and place with injustice in the first place. And before thinking that all lives matter, all lives should matter, and our current systems and the current realities of the world is that all lives aren't being all lives aren't being treated equally. Right. It's just such an incredibly disheartening thing to hear. And for anybody who's a proponent of this all lives matter philosophy should really stop and take a check if when I walk into a store and everybody's looking at me and you're going to tell me that you don't see race, you can't tell me that, when I walked into a store at 6 years old and somebody looked at me and said, you have to pay for that. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, most white folks have never walked into an elevator and had an older woman clutch her purse. Most white folks have never gone to a department store and a security guard follows you around. And as we talk about Black Lives Matter versus this false analogy of all lives, I was struck when I was watching in Michigan, people carrying machine guns and assault weapons who were all white, surrounding the Michigan State House. And where were the police? If I'm looking at it and that my son and I were watching it, we both looked at one another and said, if there were 75 young black men with machine guns surrounding Tallahassee State House, the National Guard would be out quicker than you could snap your fingers. Senator Berman, what do you say to someone who says, no, no, it's all lives matter?
It's such an ignorant comment to make because it really ignores the fact that there is racism in the country. And it really troubles me. I mean, you might have seen on TV, a congressman from Florida, who we won't name, said that exact same comment when one of his colleagues said, can one of you here at least say Black Lives Matter? And none of the colleagues did say it. And it's really troubling that that people are trying to dilute the concept of Black Lives Matter by saying all lives matter. It's not equal. Black Lives Matter because we've had so much racism and we have to address it and start the process now.
Yeah, for crying out loud, allow a social movement to own its name rather than the whites who have been a part of the problem trying to take that name and that identity from the movement. Dr. Poole, same question. How does it make you feel when you hear this, all lives matter?
Well, for me, it's an insult, and what it says to me is that basically what it says, Black Lives Matter. But if you use that all lives, what about all lives of blue lives? That says to me that you don't value me. You don't value my culture. You don't value the contributions that Blacks have made to this nation. And you also don't have a fundamental understanding of what this movement is all about. If Black lives truly matter, then why do we have the highest percentage of those incarcerated? Why is the criminal justice system, you have one type of justice for a white male that commits the same crime and a different justice for a Black male who commits the same crime? If that's the case, why do we still have achievement gaps? Why do we still have gaps in wealth, the wealth gap? Why do we still have a high percentage of Blacks who are without jobs in this country? The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, the statistics are clear. And I know, Jadon, later you wanted to talk about some of the statistics, but for the exact same crime, a Black man will get a much more severe sentence than a white man for the exact same crime, exact same job. The pay scales are dissimilar. The standard criminal justice case, the state of Georgia, not too long ago, a Black man who killed a white man guaranteed the death penalty. They never had a case where a white man who killed a Black man was found guilty. These kind of grotesque statistics. The all lives matter to me. It reminds me if I was at a university and there was an absolute scourge of rapes nonstop, and we met to discuss that, and I got up and said, well, what about the safety of men? It would completely cheapen the argument. If I was at a city council meeting, because there was the city had just dealt with a rash of anti-Semitic microaggressions, defamation of synagogues, if we were just overrun with that, and I got up and said, well, hey, what about Catholics? It would completely miss the point. So thank you for that. Now, we mentioned off camera that I'm guardedly optimistic, and I haven't been optimistic about much lately, but by watching the crowds that assemble, it seems that public opinion is changing, that there's widespread support for the Black Lives Matter movement. Pew Charitable Trusts, one of the most reputable organizations in the country, just released a few days ago a poll. They found that 67% of Americans either strongly support or somewhat support the Black Lives Matter movement. They found in the white community that 60% of whites either strongly or somewhat support, and 86% of Blacks either strongly or somewhat support. So they found broad support among Latinos, women, men. The only area where there wasn't support was Democrats and Republicans, with Republicans very low and Democrats very high. But other than that, there's widespread support. So let me start with Senator Berman. Are you encouraged by the multicultural support of this movement? What does this tell us? Are whites finally getting it? Has the movement arrived?
Absolutely. I think it's great. And I think there's a couple different factors that have made, I think as our society is becoming more multiracial, people are having Black neighbors, Black friends, people that they work with were less segregated than they were in the past. And people recognize that everybody's the same. And why should people be treated differently just because of the color of their skin? So I think you're really starting to see that society's accepting that. And that's why there's so many people out in the streets protesting along with the Black Lives Matter movement, because they recognize it's their friends, it's their neighbors, and we need to all be working together.
Absolutely. Shadon, it's your generation that is leading this. And it's college students who have always been the foot soldiers in great social movements, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the free speech movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement. It's your generation. And I know, Shadon, you're involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. How do you see the broad tapestry of the crowds? Do you see that as whites are finally getting this, and as the movement turned a corner?
Yeah, I feel like we are a lot more comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations that are stemming from this. And as you've mentioned rightfully, my generation has practiced a level of social consciousness that I don't think we've seen any time before in history. We are holding corporations to account. We are holding the individuals we support to account. And this has really created this platform where people must now choose if they're going to stand on the right side of history. And I mean, cancel culture, though it has had, though it has had some negative effects, has actually held a vast majority of our culture accountable. And I welcome the diversity in the discussion. I welcome the diversity in the conversation, because without actually bringing the people to the table and helping them to understand the very same unconscious biases that they have, the very same thing that will push them to say, I don't see color, or I don't understand my privilege, or, we are all equal. So therefore, there's nothing I should need to do. It's a beautiful thing. And I've seen a lot more people, especially within the corporate world where I'm working, where a lot more organizations and institutions have not acknowledged their own responsibilities. And predominantly white boards have decided that it is time to bring more diversity to these platforms. And I mean, it's just a beautiful thing to witness and to see happen. And there's a lot more that we can do, but this is a perfect and great start to that conversation.
Outstanding. Yeah, who would have thought that corporations, from dropping the ridiculous Aunt Jemima and some of the corporate logos and college mascots, and I think we all agree that Colin Kaepernick deserves an apology from the NFL, that Cap was, when he did that, my line, when people would holler at me, was Martin Luther King would have taken a knee. It's civil disobedience. But yeah, Dr. Poole, anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. I just say that seeing all of this completely just has been shocking. It's shocking in a way that in some instances could bring tears to your eyes, just to see the diversity of the people marching. And it's not just adults, but you have kids. You have young white children walking through their neighborhoods with signs, yelling, chanting, Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's incredible. That is really incredible. And, my hope is, as we find our way out of this pandemic, that this momentum, that it will continue, and that it will become policy that will be put into action from the local government to the state government to the federal government, from the boardroom to the education to various educational institutions. So, maybe 2-3 years from now, we can look back and see how has this movement been able to bring about the change that we want to see. But I'm hopeful, and I am optimistic that we are progressing as a society. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I just don't see how this genie gets put back in the bottle. I think it's been unleashed. A consciousness has been raised,
Yes.
And Shadon's generation will not let go of this.
Right.
Deandre, while we're on it, if I may, and we talked about this earlier, could you share with us your experience as a Black man with police, or with the kind of interactions that a lot of our audience members have probably never experienced?
Well, I have one. A couple years ago, I was driving to Washington, D.C. My wife had flown up to be with her mom, her mother-in-law, and we wanted to take the dog. So I rented a car, and I foolishly, not listening to the wife, decided to leave home at 11 o'clock at night. So I'm driving on the highway, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm in South Carolina on 995, dark. And next thing you know, I see blue lights behind me. No one in my family knew. My wife knew where I was. 3 a.m. in the morning, everybody's asleep, just me and the dog in the car. Blue lights behind me. I immediately grabbed the wheel and just pulled on the side of the road. In my mind, I'm thinking, I hope I survive. I hope that I survive. Put the light on in the car, put my hands up. And as the officer was coming to the car, he had his hand on his gun, ready to pull at any moment, even though my hands were up. And he gets to the car window. He asked me to put the one. I keep my hands up because I didn't want to give him any reason to shoot me. At that point, I was not Dr. Poole. I was not Professor Poole. I was not a husband. I was not a son. I was a Black man in a car in South Carolina at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I asked, could I give you my vehicle registration? He said, yes. At the same time, my left hand is up. And as I give him my information and my driver's license, physically, I'm shaking. Physically, I'm shaking giving him this. And I could tell that he reacted as well. So I'm pleased to say that I left that evening with my life. I'm here to talk about it. And the encounter was one that was positive, but at the same time, it was one that I will never forget. Never forget.
Thank you for sharing that, Deandre. Jadon, is there a story that or experience that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it has been incredibly interesting. I mean, I moved to the US because I'm a student at Lynn University, an international student. But I remember during the summer of last year, I was in a predominantly white, affluent neighborhood in upstate New York on July 3rd. And when we were we had like a van, and a couple of us were going to drive to the train station so that we could take the train back into Manhattan. And I was the only Black person in the group, and they asked me to sit in the front of the van. And they're like, if you as a Black person are in the back of the van, then we are just inviting unnecessary trouble. Just hearing that alone was just such a mind-blowing concept for me. And I've been given the talk. When I was moving to the US, I was told about how to handle interactions with the police. Even living in my community now, if I should go for a walk and I see a car, I remember just like a couple of weeks ago, I was walking from the store, and I was in a black hoodie, and it was the minute I was 5 minutes from my house and I realized I was in a black hoodie, and I was immediately overwhelmed with fear. I was like, this is a horrible decision, walking outside in a black hoodie. And quite surprisingly, a police car started driving, approaching me. And I just took out the phone and I called my parents, just so I could have somebody on the line. And I assumed guilt, though I have never committed a crime before. I felt guilty, and I was prepared to like, if I was instructed to lay on the floor, I would have just acted guilty, though I had done absolutely nothing wrong, to make sure that I would not join the statistic of Black men who fit the profile or was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. So I mean, it's just the plight that we walk with every single day. It's like we're just waiting for that moment for things to go airy and taking extra precautions to make sure it never happens.
As a white man, I've never had to tell my 20-year-old son when he goes out with his friends to be respectful to the police, to never say a word because your slightest comment. I've never had to sit up until he comes in at night panicked that he gets pulled over by a police officer. A colleague of mine, project, he's a Black professor in New Mexico, and he had contacted me and said, apologies for the delay. He said, he had a BMW. He said, I took my car to the campus and went for a jog. They saw a sweaty 30-year-old African-American man getting in a BMW with shorts. He said, there were two cars on me. And he said, unfortunately, I had gotten changed and put my pants with my wallet in the trunk. He said it was lights out. He gets dragged to the station. It could have turned really, really bad. And I remember telling him, my God, did you get their name, the badge numbers? What are we going to do about this? He said, are you kidding me? This happens all the time. And I felt absolutely foolish for that remark. Thank you both, Deandre and Jadon, for sharing a painful story. Senator Berman, let's talk about education. K through 12, what kind of conversations do school teachers have to be having with their students? What must we do, or you as a legislative leader, in terms of policy or curriculum? What needs to be done for us to seize this teachable moment and turn a lemon into lemonade?
Thank you. We really need to overhaul our education, our historical education in America. We have a requirement in the state that we do have to teach African-American history, but it's not working. Most of us, we all just celebrated Juneteenth. I grew up, I never heard of Juneteenth. I asked my children who are in their 20s and early 30s, they never heard of it. It wasn't taught. That's just one example of the many things in our curriculum that we don't teach people about. And it's funny because we do need to overhaul our African-American studies, but we need to overhaul all of our studies because it's all American history. It's a part of our history. It's not just African-American history. We need to, people need to understand about the slave trade. You gave us a great discussion at the beginning about how this has gone on continuously. We've gone from the slave trade to Jim Crow, now to the prison mass incarcerations. People don't hear about that in their education. And we're looking at a bill for next year to talk about, to revise some of the African-American studies that happen in school. But it's huge. It's not just a little portion. It's a major overhaul that we need so that everybody understands the historical basis that's gone on in the past.
Indeed, Florida is one of those few states that mandates Holocaust education, and it's inconceivable to think that we would not be teaching this, but a lot of states are not. And to use my analogy from earlier, vis-a-vis genocide and the Holocaust, anti-Semitic violence is bled into the soil of Europe, the way racism is bled into the soil and history of the United States. And we can't just have American history, Black studies needs to be front and center as a major part of American history, not just what year was the Declaration signed. Dr. Poole, as an academic, what needs to happen at the higher education, the university levels, in terms of how do we seize this moment to teach it? What must be done in terms of curriculum, Black studies courses, a course on Black Lives Matter, and things of that fact?
I would say that it starts from the top. You need to have an administration that recognizes that this is a problem, and to not just to pretend that as if they care. Part of the challenge we have in higher education, you're starting to see some changes, but you have individuals who've been hired to work on the diversity and inclusion health of the institution, but oftentimes they are marginalized and not truly allowed to do the kind of work that they need to do to bring about that kind of change, to create a campus atmosphere that is open and welcoming. I would say that it starts with making sure that you have training for faculty search committees. Oftentimes search committees, they get together, they may know people at an institution, and they'll hire, they'll look at this person, who does this person know? Okay, well, let's pull him or her here, without truly doing enough to go and attract and recruit minority candidates. I would even add that perhaps look inward. Who you have any graduate students that you can train and develop or help support who would want to come back and teach at your institution. Having faculty and students build strong relationships. Dr. Watson, you've been extremely a leader on this. Having students and faculty build relationships to be able to address these systemic issues, and as well as providing counselors on campus and just creating safe spaces so students can engage and talk about these issues. If students don't feel that it's safe on campus or in the classroom, they're not going to talk about them. They're not going to talk about them. So those would be some of the things and also allocation of resources into programs that will address these issues on campuses as well.
Excellent. You know, I'm looking forward this fall to see what universities across the country are going to be doing, what kind of changes are going to be made. And Dr. Poole, you know this, you and I have served on countless search committees when they're hiring. I wonder how many search committees don't have a single person of color or a single woman on a search committee. And if you're looking at historically underrepresented fields in technology and math and science and even history and politics once upon a time, I wonder what that message says if candidates don't see a single diverse face on the committee. You know, we have core curriculums on every campus from Harvard to Hawaii. Lynn University has a core, FAU has a core, and we make sure that students are exposed to math and quantitative reasoning, to science and so forth and so on. But when are we going to make social justice a core commitment to our curriculum? And Jadon, as a Lynn student, you're going to be hearing about this within days. Lynn University is taking that step this coming fall. And I'm eager to see who else is doing that. I'm also offering a brand new class on the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's going to be opened up then to a campus-wide where all faculty and staff come in, and we're doing a community course on it. Jadon, as a student, what do you think needs to be done in terms of your college experience or any schooling to incorporate Black Lives Matter into the education?
Yeah, you know, I completely just echo the sentiments that were expressed before. I feel like we also need to bring the concept of tolerance to our classrooms, how to live with the people we might feel very different about or who might not share the same opinions or perspectives that we do. And then this next idea of deliberate actions, which is one place, you know, I feel like being a student at Lynn and our commitment to social change has really pushed students that knowledge that we play a part in creating the change that we want to see in the world. Regardless of how big that change might be, you know, that individual effort is gonna create a ripple effect that is just beyond what we could ever imagine. And then there's one thing going on in the chat that I kind of also would like to address a little bit on the same tone. When we're educating people about Black Lives Matter, it's not necessarily only talking about Black Lives Matter as an organization. I feel like we're really just saying the actual practical thing, which is Black lives do matter. And it's a very dangerous rhetoric once we get into this way of when individuals and individual groups that are, you know, proponents of the Black Lives Matter movement start to champion or express different ideologies. It's not fair for us to lump this logic that these single individual represents the entire group or should bear the burden, or that the entire group should bear the burden of the few bad apples that live within these groups. Because as a Black person, my agenda is not to be anti-Semitic. My agenda is not to call for vandalism and destruction. My agenda is to advocate for Black voices who might not be given these platforms to talk about these different things. And I can't, you know, I can't realistically, like we don't have like a phone line we can call and talk to all Black people and be like, hey, don't do this. But we can advocate that there are avenues to create change that does not include some of these, you know, way out of line things. So I'm just sharing that sentiment while we're on it.
Thank you for bringing it up, Jadon. That was something I scribbled to myself a note to touch on that in the close, but I was following the chat chain. And, you know, I think you hit that out of the ballpark. Everyone, if you disagree with one aspect of the Black Lives Matter movement or what a few folks in it are doing do not cheapen the discussion, the dialogue for the African American community writ large and American history. I have been a staunch supporter of Israel. I can't count how many fundraisers I've done for organizations, books and articles I've written, advocacy. I gave a lecture at Yad Vashem, but I don't agree with Bibi Netanyahu. My disagreement with him is not taken to the Jewish community writ large or the larger Jewish diaspora. The disagreement is with Bibi. I don't hold it against Israel. And to disagree with a voice or two or whatever in the Black Lives Movement would, as Jadon so eloquently said, would be to completely miss the point. Let's move to police reform, and then I have two things I want to close with. Senator Berman, you know, obviously part of this equation, we need viable police reform. Of course, not defunding police departments. There has to be law enforcement, but maybe banning chokeholds, maybe banning stop and frisk, maybe banning no-knock warrants, hiring more Black officers, requiring body cams, retraining for de-escalation. There's a lot that has to be done to change police culture, which is going to be easier said than done. And I worry about this false dichotomy that almost every time I have this conversation, not only does someone yell "White Lives Matter" at me, but secondly, people say, well, I stand with the police. To stand with Black Lives Matter is not standing against the police. To stand with the police is not standing against Black Lives Matter. What we need is viable police reform so that Black lives do matter. So, Senator Berman, are there any forms of police reform or criminal justice reform that you see a need for, or perhaps a legislative remedy in the Florida legislature?
Yeah, yes. I mean, we're starting to have that discussion. We've been talking about those issues over the years. Not enough has been done. Certainly, we need to talk about police reform. We need to talk about criminal reform. We've got too many people who are in jail for minor offenses. We're talking about trying to figure out how to change some of that discussion. But I also think we need to have a bigger discussion, and that is the role of the police department. They're involved in a lot of things right now, domestic violence, mental health problems. Maybe we're better off having people who are a crisis intervention team that would go in and take some of the responsibility, leave the police to do the actual policing work instead of so much of the social health work that we put on them. And that would change the dynamic of it. You know, I agree with you. I get very upset about the dichotomy. It's not a dichotomy. There shouldn't be you know, I support police. I support the need for having police, but I want us to look at the bigger picture about what they're doing, what we need them to do. And then there's a lot of smaller, not small, but important issues like the chokeholds and things like that that can be addressed. I know Congress is working on some of those issues right now. We're not in session again until next March, but I'm sure we're going to have significant discussions of all those issues when we go back in session in March.
Good, glad to hear it. Dr. Poole, you've had a couple of very interesting things to say about this. I know that you've talked about the need to train to de-escalate. And the other thing, Dr. Poole, that I like that you said is our police motto, you know, to protect and to serve has become to fear and to control. In certain communities, we almost need a paradigm shift back to it. Would you like to share your thoughts, Deandre?
Oh, sure. I just want to say I agree with everything Senator Berman said, and I would just add to that, certainly more training, because when you think about it, studies have shown that more police officers are trained more on how to use firearms and in self-defense, less on community policing, conflict resolution, and conflict management. So that right there shows you something is not being taught. Not even been taught culture bias or the history of law enforcement, which leads me to the next point in saying that yes, to serve and protect that is really just a smokescreen for fear and control. When you think about the history of policing in this country, it started with slavery, and in the 1960s, I'll try to be as short as I can, Doc. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, Charles Hamilton, they wrote about these issues in terms of how the police viewed the Black community as colonists, when you truly think about it. So if the Black community is viewed as a colonist in this country, then the police are viewed as the enforcers of those in power. And that leads to the same fear and control mindset that a lot of Black people have in this country around policing. There's fear and a large level of distrust. So we don't trust them. So we have to start by building that trust up, because to be honest with you, when you look at the issues that go on with policing, the Black community is over-policed. And when you look at historically the origins of police, who were organized to go and to protect the slave owners' property, because they viewed slaves as property, and to protect the economic interests of those in power. The same parallels exist today. I don't have time to really get into it and break it down, but we're still dealing with the effects of slavery. And here we are in 2020 having this conversation.
Yeah, I hear you. The Fugitive Slave Acts were dealt with as a policing matter, and which is indescribably inhumane. Jadon, is there anything you want to add to that? And then I have the final closing question for everyone.
Sure. You know, I kind of want to tail on this idea of, you know, police reform. I'm a resident advisor at school. I have a responsibility to look after students who are, you know, living on our college campus. 80% of my training goes into conflict resolution. It's quite staggering that as a resident assistant, I feel a bit more prepared to deal with like some domestic or social dispute than a police officer. And honestly, like if my residents have any challenges, they are way more prepared to come to me to have a conversation. But I remember quite vividly, one day 4 police officers showed up to our dorm. And I kid you not, that 16 different individuals on my floor called me to almost act as a barrier between them and the police.
Wow.
And that's just a perception by college students. And, you know, a lot of people like to talk about this element of black and black crime. And it's just sort of like, you know, data does not necessarily, data without context does not really give you much. Because crime tends to happen in proximity, meaning we're more likely to commit crime to people who live closest to us. And we're also most likely to commit crimes against people we know. So obviously there's going to be an elevated number of black on black crime once we start to look at it, because nobody talks about white on white crime, even though that is a thing that is happening. There is, however, a strong correlation between crime and poverty that nobody tends to evaluate. And even though African Americans represent the minority of the American population, they're still one of the largest social groups that live beneath the poverty line. So that's the correlation that we can start examining there in terms of how we bring in economic mobility and economic justice to these communities as a way of helping to bring down crime within these communities and stop painting this image as if all black people are up to get each other, when 75% of black people in prisons are therefore misdemeanors or non-offensive, non-violent drug offenses. So I think we have to start looking at some of these other things and not just take these statistics that support our arguments and forget the systems that actually perpetuate some of the challenges in the first place.
Yeah, excellent, well said. And well, that's a whole nother issue we could do on data. You know, I'm sure there are some schools that may need a uniformed police officer who hopefully would get retraining, but I think a lot of schools could use a social worker. Yes. And school counselors with that money. Last question, and we'll use it as kind of a closing comment for everyone. 2-part question. How do we build a long-term social justice movement? And what kind of conversations should we all be having about Black Lives Matter? Our audience, when they go home with their friends and call one another, when they call their children and grandchildren, what kind of conversations should they be having about this movement? Senator Berman, I'll give the first close to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for this panel. It's been really informative. So there's a couple things that I think all of us should be doing. The first thing is listening, especially people who are white. We need to listen. And we need to hear what's being said, not just listen, but really understand and hear, because this has gone on for way too long, and it's because we haven't really listened. And we need to keep educating ourselves. We need to keep learning. I'm reading Ibram Kendi's book right now, Engraved, Stamped from the Beginning. And then he also has a book that's the #1 New York Times bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Read, watch movies, see Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, learn about his movement, what's going on. We need to listen, and then we need to learn and do our own research and understand. And then as a legislator, it's my responsibility. I'm assuring everyone, we're going to go back to Tallahassee. We're going to talk about criminal justice reform. We're going to talk about education reform. We're going to look at systemic racism and try and understand it. And people should be having those discussions among themselves about systemic racism. And I do want to address the issue of anti-Semitism in the Black Lives Movement, which has been in the chat room. I spoke with the ADL this morning because I wanted to totally understand the issue. When in 2016, there was one line in a platform that was put out that was anti-Israel. It was removed in 2017. The movement is a hierarchical movement. It's not a hierarchical movement. There is no one person who's just saying, this is what they do, this is their platform. There are some people, just like Shadon said, who are speaking out, but are not speaking for everybody in the movement. The movement is not an anti-Semitic movement by any stretch of the imagination. And we need to be having that discussion on that issue. There is no one person who is speaking for everyone. And we need to recognize that. And the other thing, I think, the other really hard issue that I'd like to see us start to discuss is the issue of reparations. I'm not saying write everybody a check and then, people get panicked when they hear the word reparations. But there has been systemic racism in this country, and we need to figure out how we can raise the community and what we can do if it means putting more money into certain communities to bring them up to parity. That's something that we all need to be discussing right now. So I'm optimistic about this movement, but it's some really hard, deep, long questions that we all need to be discussing among ourselves to really make a difference. And I think we can do it. I think the time is now, but we all have to commit to that. So thank you so much.
Senator Berman, thank you. And I'm not just saying this, but having this legislature is, we all know the way this legislature is, but having you in it makes me feel so much better about the kind of conversation that's going to occur. And also thank you for tackling the question of a supposed anti-Semitic wing in this massive grassroots movement. And yeah, one of the topics I had written down, but I thought it would, quite frankly, I probably should have put it in there, but the idea of reparations. I have long favored reparations that look like this: scholarships for Black students, infrastructure investments in the Black community, microfinancing and loans in the Black community. Good God, the Fortune 500 and our big banks have been making it, head over heels financially. They have a responsibility, as Jadon talked about, holding corporations responsible. So there is a conversational reparations that we have to be able to have, not saying one way or the other, it's just that people are afraid to have the conversation. So thank you for that. Dr. Poole, closing comment on how do we build a sustainable social justice movement, and what kind of conversations should our audience be having?
Absolutely. I think that part of it, as Senator Berman stated that education. Mm-hmm. Education. You're hearing now so many folks are tuning in to Netflix and looking for documentaries. There are so many books now that people are reading that to educate themselves on some of these systemic issues. And I would just say, you have to put, the saying, you put your money where your mouth is, where if you don't have money to contribute to a cause, then your time, your energy. The movement needs allies. And we need white allies who serve in institutions of higher education, who are in the banking industry, who are in the halls of Congress in Tallahassee, in every facet of our government, to actually seek out those who are doing meaningful work around these issues that affect your sphere of influence. We all have areas of influence. Maybe you're retired. You can still pick up the phone call. You still have contacts. You still have access to capital or to individuals who can bring about that sort of change. So when all of these different pieces are working together, that we'll start to see the change that we need to see in order to bring about a more equal and just society.
Absolutely. And I feel good about you going before so many young people, Dr. Poole, and your students, and having this kind of conversation with them, because that's the generation that's inheriting this, and that's the generation that's going to make the change. So thank you so much for that. Jadon, last word.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation and providing this space. I was listening to a TED talk, and the gentleman on the talk, he said, ignorance breeds fear. We fear those things we do not understand. If we don't keep that fear in check, that fear in turn will breed hatred. And I really do think a lot of us really need to acknowledge our privilege. And by acknowledging our privilege, we put ourselves in the position to recognize that I, as an individual, can take action. And what does that action look like? It's looking at the people we are hiring. It's looking at the boards that we sit on, or is there equal representation on those platforms? The people we're investing our money in, does that reflect the diversity of our society? And I mean, for me, diversity is not just limited to race. We're talking about, inclusiveness for genders, for people who live in with disabilities, for people from different sexualities and different religious practices. We have to bring and create equal platforms for all these different voices to participate. And as one of my great friends said, that I wholeheartedly support as a social entrepreneur, a great way to create any change is to hire the people and wire the check.
All right.
Yeah, I thank you for that, the three of you. And I just wanted to quickly piggyback on, a comment that I think ties into what all three of you said. And Deandre talked about the movement needs allies. One of the truly great allies to the civil rights movement in the 1960s was the Jewish community. The shared history of persecution and oppression, the shared experiences, and the number of Jewish attorneys and financiers who played a wonderful role. And that's the kind of support and allies that we need to see. I've a couple comments, questions from the audience here. Let me throw it out. And Deandre, I see you on the screen, so I'll give the first one to Dr. Poole. People are saying, get out the vote. Well, do you think that this movement is going to encourage all these people marching and young folks, Jadon's age, to get out and vote this November?
I think it certainly will contribute to it. I think that we start to see what happened in Minneapolis with the reform of the police department there, what they did at the state, the governor and the state leaders, and you're starting to see other instances, across different parts of the country. So I think it's a part of it. I do think that certainly more organizations working together to get the vote out will add to that. So it's just a piece of it, but I do think it will help contribute to getting out the vote.
Jadon, your generation voting this fall, is this movement going to translate into polls or into political activism?
There will be so many youth at the poll today, and it's something that I'm so excited about, because I remember being at a protest down in Boca, and there was just an enormous number of people who had a sign that says "Go out to vote." It's the only way to actually create change. Do it at the polls.
Senator Berman, as the recipient of our votes.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope so. I worry a little bit because March for Our Lives did not get as many people out voting as we thought it would, the gun control movement. But I hope that this one is going to be the change and that we will see lots of people out voting. So I'm always happy to have more voters.
Good. Glad to hear that. I had another person asked about white privilege. We have to address the topic of white privilege. We talked about the All Lives Matter, but Senator Berman, what do you say to people that say they're, as a white person, I'm not privileged. I didn't own slaves. I didn't do this. What do you say to someone that asks about white privilege?
then that they obviously are pretty ignorant if that's their background. I mean, it's certainly the fact that I never had to have that talk and you never had to have the talk with your children about what to do when you're stopped by a police officer. That in and of itself is such a key of showing you that you have white privilege. So those people need to be aware that we have it. We don't worry about driving while I don't worry about driving while black. I don't worry that I'm going to be pulled over. I mean, that experience that Dr. Poole told us about, that's not something that I worry about. And everybody needs to be aware that we do indeed have white privilege, and just not in the police, but in our economic and the way our healthcare. It's pervasive throughout society. And I would say that you need to spend some time learning a little bit more and understanding and listening and doing the things that we talked about, listen and learn and have those discussions, because there is certainly white privilege in our society.
Well said, and I'm glad that you ended that. I was going to add that a couple of people said, what can we do to help as white folks? The answer to start is to listen, I had a jaw dropper about 5 years ago. I was on my way to teach, and I was running a minute late, and I was going too fast. The police officer pulled me over, and he walked up to me and he was like, "Oh, hey, Dr. Watson, come on, slow down." I'm like, I'm sorry. I get to class, we had a test. One of my students, black student, came in 30 minutes late. He goes, "I'm sorry, I got pulled over this morning, and you know what that's like." And I just went, oh, no, I don't. So talk about white privilege. Dr. Poole, what do you say to white folks who ask about white privilege?
Well, I have these conversations with my students often, and I will say to them, when we're having that very uncomfortable conversation, that you didn't enslave people that look like me, but you benefited from slavery, and white people continue to benefit from it today. Okay, so what you have to do is figure out what you can do in your area of influence. So when you become supervisors and managers and CEOs of companies and business owners and elected officials, what can you do to bring about equitable change in your organization, your institution, to address these systemic racial divide issues?
Good point. I've always said that the single largest beneficiary of affirmative action has been white men since the beginning of time. Look at college admissions, look at jobs, look at, outstanding academic students like George W. Bush and Donald Trump that got into Ivy League institutions. Affirmative action has always benefited white folk, and we have to have that conversation. Jadon, is this a conversation that college students, folks your age, have about white privilege? Or are we beyond generation?
We do. We have these very uncomfortable conversations, especially around white fragility. I remember like participating in one space and just kind of experiencing one person who broke into tears learning about their privilege. And I think it's such a thing to recognize that with that privilege does not come the benefit of not understanding the truth. And even though it might want to bring you into tears, it's just something you have to deal with. And I remember, it was Albert Einstein who said we cannot solve our problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. So if you are of the assumption that, I do not see skin color, or, all lives should matter, or I do not have privilege, then you are just advocating for pseudo change. You want things to remain in the status quo. And pseudo change in reality just seems like a much safer option for so many people. And we have to tackle that fear that comes from just feeling as if you're being attacked whenever we talk about that privilege.
Thank you for that. Well stated. Very impressive. Quick closing comment, everybody, if you'll bear with me. There are so many questions being raised by the Black Lives Matter movement, worthy questions, and I hope we raised a few of them today, questions that make us uncomfortable, and that's a good thing. Equally, there are so many difficult questions raised by the continuing scourge of racism, if I may. At the core of almost all these questions I believe, is the question, how do we confront history? It's painfully clear that the US is not the post-racial society that some people thought it was when Barack Obama was elected. If you'll allow me just a closing minute on a soapbox, 2 thoughts. Number 1, Dr. Poole would agree with me because he and I have been teaching this for a while. The civil rights movement, I believe, is often incorrectly taught and falsely depicted in textbooks as having the goal of creating a race-neutral society. Absolutely not. The civil rights movement had as its goal racial justice. Our goal should not be to be a race-neutral society. Too many whites say, as Jadon said, I just don't see race. I just see the person. Well, if you don't see race, you can't understand the long and tragic history. If you don't see race, you don't see your own white privilege. If you don't see race, you don't see your responsibility to act. Not seeing race is a denial of the past. It means that you can't see the cause. Therefore, as Jadon said, you can't be part of the solution. Point number 2, confronting racism and confronting American history means confronting systemic denial. Let's take the advice of the great writer Toni Morrison. In her book, Beloved, she didn't use the words memory and forgetting. Instead, she used re-memory and disremembering. What did she mean by that? What she meant by that is we have altered and forgotten the past when it comes to race. Even more so, we've done it on purpose. It's easier to ignore or erase the horrors of our history than to face them. It's easier to say, well, I didn't do that, than it is to accept that whites have benefited from what was done in the past. But even more so, we as a society then denied that that even happened, and we continue to do so. American history isn't always the way it's presented in textbooks, because Black history has been glossed over, Black history has been trampled on, because Black lives were excluded from the start, because Black lives have not mattered. I'll close with one thought. The scholar Michael Eric Dyson, in his book, Tears We Cannot Stop, which I recommend to you, he reminds us, it's not just denial of fact, it's denial as fact. I'd like to thank our 3 panelists. I can't think of 3 better panelists. You were wonderful.
Thank you.
I learned some things. I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank my friend Stephanie Owitz and the good folks at the Sandler Center and JCC for always organizing meaningful programs. And mostly, I'd like to thank all the folks that tuned in. I hope this has made you a little uncomfortable. I hope it's raised some questions. And I encourage you all to go out, as I will, and have meaningful dialogues with a wide assortment of folks about this. Thank you, everyone.
If I could just say one word, I know that I'm speaking on behalf of our audience. It was a fantastic experience, a really meaningful, thoughtful experience, and we're very grateful to all of you. Thank you for getting us going on this conversation. We're going to continue it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, and thank you.